so like I say, the first 45 minutes, I'm going to talk to you about the rest of where I took off from last week, about culture and within organisations and how that impacts on strategy. And then we've got Will Bonas, who's coming in from Dickinson Dees, to talk to us about not just the legal aspects of mergers and acquisitions, but the processes that they go through, or is gone through as a general strategy for mergers and acquisitions, which is very interesting. I hope. I'm sure it will be. So, last week, just to remind you, we started up with this, just to punch home really, and not for you to underestimate the impact that culture has when you are trying to implement some strategy or your merger or acquisition within an organisation. We determined what organisational culture is and how that manifests itself, and then we looked at the different levels of culture within an organisation. We started at this we defined this cultural bedrock as being the unseen, and where it's a deep-rooted aspect of culture that is really difficult to ascertain and to influence in any sort of way. We gave a scenario about monkey business and how the monkey guys in the cage were influenced by past cultures and how nothing changed within that certain environment. So this is, I think, where we got up to. The characteristics of organisational. So there's the formal and the informal types of organisational culture. And the formal types seem to present itself in the fact that companies could be innovative and or risk-taking. It's their attention to detail, the degree to which the employees are expected to exhibit precision analysis during their working processes and their attention to detail. The outcome orientation, the degree to which the management focuses on results, the outcomes, rather than the techniques and processes in which they work. So these are all to the different degrees in which an organisation does this that will present the culture that is inherent within that organisation. Whether it is people orientated or team orientated, the degree to which people are aggressive and competitive rather than easygoing will create that sort of culture, and the stability of the organisation. A lot of change and upheaval is not necessarily good for a stable environment, and it's not just the internal environment, but it could be the external. So these are the formal addresses, if you like, to organisational culture, and then there's the informal ones that happen on a day-to-day basis, but are not necessarily addressed to any great extent because it's something that, like we established last time, it's just the way that things are done around here. So that's the artefacts, the language in form of jokes, metaphors, stories, myths and legends, the way that people behave and their attitudes. The symbols and symbolic action, and I think we might have touched on this last week. The symbols and symbolic action are those such as the cars that they have in their car park for employees, the facilities that they have, the ways that they promote their working culture, if you like. I did a build down in Leeds, which was for an entrepreneurial company, and it was on one of the business parks in Leeds. And as an entrepreneurial company, it was to be this innovative sort of space, a bit like Google or IKEA. If you go to their head offices, you'll see these open environments, and a bit like the ones that I was talking to you about with regards to Oticon. Now this it was great, and we were doing it build, and we had the internal partitions, which were all glass, so all offices could be seen, everybody could see, everybody was visible. There was the meeting areas that was quite open, but at the end of this corridor, there was another big glass window, and behind this glass window was a set of drums, a grand piano, about 5 or 6 guitars, all the instruments you could possibly think of, all behind this glass window. And I was like, what's this for? He says, oh yeah, he says, well, you know, when people have a break or something, it's an outlet for the employees. We just go down there and have a jam, and the director goes in and he has a go on the piano, and it's an outlet for them. And it's just as a culture that they promoted within their company, so that they could encourage this expression, self-expression, if you like. So it's just a different way, these symbols are ways in which you can reinforce the culture within a company. And by changing those sort of artifacts and symbols is one way to start to manipulate the way in which people behave. So that's the informal side of the culture. And has anyone seen this symbol before? The paradigm of the cultural web. It's probably something that I think we'll look at in your in the seminars. Is to start to analyse more critically the way in which the organisations run, both formally and informally. So in the middle you have this paradigm, which is a constellation of concepts, values and perceptions of people, and then you have these outer rings that will impact on this, these outer don't know, divisions, if you like. So you've got we've got the stories sort of go in hand with the history of the organisation, the type of stories, the stories that are told from people to people about the organisation. So you go into an organisation and you'll hear stories about who's who, the way things are done around here. And this is inherent. It's a bit like the monkey situation when this is something that's gone down the line, and nobody actually really probably knows the real meaning of this, but it's just what we do. These are the stories that we tell about certain situations. Then you have, like I said before, the symbols, symbolic aspects of the organisation, the logos, the office cars, the titles, the type of languages that is used. I was just a salesperson at base level for quite a number of years. But in every organisation I went to, I had a different title. It all meant the same, a little bit of different seniority as I was at the post, but one was a sales executive, one was a sales director, one was a territory executive, you know, but it all meant the same, but it creates this, I don't know, this culture in which people, and influences the way that people behave. We're currently setting up an organisation at the minute with me and a student and some other academics all over the world, really. It's a Neuroarchitecture Society, and we were looking for titles for ourselves, and what does that say about us? And rather than saying the director or whatever, we now decided that we're going to call ourselves the founders, because it says a certain thing, has a more grounding, a more almost a family orientated connotation, really. So it's all about these titles and the way, and these little things that will influence the way people behave. The organisational structures. I mean, you guys as project managers will be working in a project-orientated organisations that their structures are probably in the form of matrix structures, where they'll draw upon all different divisions in order to bring together different specialisations and functions, so that you will enable you to carry out projects. But the way in which that is a very flat organisation structure, is it very hierarchical. It will control the way that people, again, behave. The control systems. The control systems are the ways in which you are measured, the ways in which you are rewarded. That is controlling you, controlling your behaviour, the way in which you act. Whether you act with, they give you rewards for doing certain things, or control the way that you behave towards, or your attitude towards a certain task or a certain project. And the ritual and routines the members of the organisation have towards each other, the way that, again, we said, the way that they do things around here, stuff that they're taken for granted. And probably these ritual and routines are probably one of the hardest things to change. By its very nature, it's a routine. It's not something. It's a habit. It's habit forming. It's not something that's easy, as I said, to change. So, by analysing your company, your banks, for example, you'll be able to make assumptions almost, if you like, or ascertain where these certain areas lie and what's involved in those, what impacts on them. So mergers and culture, how does this fit in with what we were talking about, the bank situation? It says here it's more like a birth than a marriage. It says the new organisation has genes from both parents. Remember last week we talked about the DNA of an organisation. This is another slant on this. It's got its own unique genetic coding. So it's got genes from both parents, so these mergers that are coming together, but also suffer from a traumatic birth and lack of good parenting in the early years. So this is very inherent in these sort of mergers. This is how culture starts to manifest itself. So culture is what a group learns over a period of time, as a group solves its problems of survival in an external environment and its problems of internal integration. This is when they start to overcome their traditional or own cultures and start to possibly form a new culture built on the foundations of something that they already know. So such learning is simultaneously a behavioural, cognitive and an emotional process. And whilst you guys are not human resources, you're not there for necessarily a shoulder to cry on, this is something that you have to also take into account when being in the mix of this. Your staff, if you like, will turn to you for answers. Remember when we were talking about change, and it's all about communication, and it's about giving them enough information that will make them feel comfortable to be able to move on to the next process, this acceptance. So managing cultural integration at a strategic level, little consideration is given to the cultural aspects of the acquisition or merger process. This is something that we touched on last week about, and what Ben will talk about is the more due diligence aspect rather than the cultural due diligence, which is it's not obligatory. It's not something that is driven by law necessarily. So less consideration is given to that, because management are overwhelmed with the operational aspects of the integration. They see the business outcomes. They want to know whether what they're doing is beneficial. This is why they're doing it. But they have to also consider how it's going to work, and that is driven by the people themselves. But if they focused at least as much time on the working relationship as they spent on the contractual one, then they would have a better, a more comprehensive understanding of who they're marrying, if you like. So Harbison and Paker have identified cultural differences as one of the key implementation issues that needs to be carefully evaluated and managed during alliance formation. It's quite difficult to ascertain this in your bank mergers and acquisitions because you can't get a feel for the culture. There's no symbols necessarily. You have some control systems that you can identify with. You have possibly an organisational structure. There are aspects of their culture that you can almost build a picture up of, within that working document. But it's different to when you actually go into a place and hear the stories about what people are saying, how they're reacting to certain situations. But there are assumptions that you can make based on what you've got. So it's capable of blunting or significantly altering the intended impact of even well thought out changes. As like we said before, culture eats strategy for breakfast, and again, like it says here, it could be detrimental or beneficial to a project depending on how it's managed. Organisational culture comes in many forms and therefore could be less or more supportive of change. There's some theoretical aspects, and we'll touch on a few of these now, of how culture is considered, not just in mergers or acquisitions, but just generally in organisational theories. So organisation members show a positive bias towards members of their own in-group. And we all have experience of this in-group, the people who are what the company's all about, the central focus of the company, and tend to hold a negative view about the members of an out-group in order to enhance the relative standing of their own kind, us versus them. And this is something that you will be aware of in your mergers and acquisitions, in this acquisition of the banks. It is very much a situation of us and them. One bank is buying out another. There's a stronger cultural hold, and I'll reflect upon this in a minute. But when we did the 5 tricks, where the culture was more remained on the table that it started at. So the people who were there, it was very much an us and them situation. It's like you wouldn't behave the way you would behave on your own in your own house that you would in somebody else's. It's that sort of culture. So conversely, research also suggests that contrasting points of view enrich the gene pool. So whilst there is this conflict of us and them, managed effectively, and if it's recognised initially, then this could actually promote some innovative ways of thinking and enrich this potential that the organisation has. So, can management of culture improve project performance? Well, of course, yes. If it wasn't managed effectively, it would be disarray. But it's the precise measurement of the impact of culture on the organisation and projects assessed that will always be difficult. How do you measure culture? So this is where we just reflect a little bit on what we did and put it into context. So you did this practical element, which was fun, but there was the serious side of this. There was lessons learned. And you'll recognise some of these, that in most interpersonal situations we make several unwarranted assumptions. You assumed that when you went to another table that the rules that you were playing with were the same as the ones that you had been playing with at your own table. People engaged in the same activity may use different procedures. Again, there's this different way of working. Someone had already established that way on that table, and you came along, and everything was different. As I say, nobody had the same set of rules. You can't believe everything you read. This is this blame culture, and they were blaming Chris. I think they were blaming you for not reading the rules properly to them. So there was this, well, it was his fault, and they didn't believe that he read it properly. Communication problems exacerbated cross-cultural clashes. So the fact that you couldn't speak, there's this, well, there were other forms of communication, but it exacerbated the situation because it was very frustrating for you guys that you weren't able to get across what it is that you thought, that you believed was right. people with non-verbal communication skills do have an advantage, and this isn't just people who are communicate because they're deaf and it's sign language, but non-communication skills as in demonstration through either drawings or symbols or gestures, or the way that you your body language, for example, is a great communicator. Having a partner reduces the impact of the culture shock, and I think we went over that as well. If it had been a single person that was going from one culture to another, there would have been a greater feeling of isolation. Yeah, everyone was looking at me, trying to get answers from me to sort out this chaos that they were experiencing. It was like, what's going on? Well, no, I wasn't going to help you. If I was managing the situation, then of course I would help you, because that would have mitigated any chaotic behaviour. And again, there's this blame culture in these situations. In chaotic situations, unscrupulous people implement or make up the rules that give them an advantage. I've played this before when guys just cheat because, or they make up the rules as they're going along. When they've realised what's going on, they just stop it. Okay, well, then the next one come along, we'll make up some more rules and we'll just see how that one, we'll throw another spanner in the works. Guys who are assertive, people who are aware of the situation, they have an advantage. Of course they did. Oh, I know what's going on. Yeah, I get the rules. Right, okay, how do I make this to my advantage? Or how do I make this work? When other people have behave differently from your expectations, you assume they are dishonest or ignorant. And very few people consider the possibility that different people may have different rules. It probably didn't even cross your mind initially that there were different rules on these tables. And when you go into a new organisation, you think things are going to be new, but not as radically new, and how you're not prepared necessarily for how you're going to need to adapt in those situations. I'll pick up on a couple of these. Some people are too embarrassed to communicate in unconventional ways, and therefore there's this breakdown in communication. If you can't communicate in the way that you would ordinarily communicate, i.e. talking to each other, you know, people are not automatically demonstrative in their expression, unlike me, constantly uses their hands to demonstrate something or put a point across. I mentioned this before about the home team having the advantage because they were imposing their rules because it was their table, it was their territory. And had you all been playing by the same rules, there would have been a greater acceptance of people coming into your culture or on your table. So the impact on mergers and acquisitions as a negative perspective would look like this. In an acquisition, cohesiveness among the members of the target firm is likely to increase, and entreaties from the inquirer are apt to be resisted. Acquiring managers from a stronger or larger company are prone to adopt an attitude of superiority and treat their members of the target firm as inferior. This has a danger. This is something that could potentially happen in your integration. There is one stronger, more dominant culture that is going to overtake the other culture. So it's how do you prevent that almost from happening, or nurture it in a way that is advantageous rather than negative. On a more positive note, differences rather than similarities create this friction, this need for synergies, this learning environment where people feel, do you remember this house of change? They feel enriched, livened, more receptive to anything that was going on around them. Diversity can also break rigidities in inquiry firms, help them to develop richer market and management knowledge and foster innovation, which is great, but you need to communicate this. This is the sort of things that you need to be communicating to people, the advantageous aspects of this, what it means to them. If you're given a change situation, the only thing you want to know is, what does that mean to me? How's that going to impact on me? Selfish as it may seem, this is the crux of it. Mergers and acquisitions can provide the firm with a competitive advantage by giving them access to unique and potentially valuable capabilities that are embedded in a different culture. It's about exploiting the advantages that have come along, or the skills that have been acquired from other companies. So both accounts depend on a number of variables. That's the nature and extent of the difference, because after all they're still two banks. It's not like this is going into a different market. It's not like they don't know what they're going into. There's a similarity there, but the differences lie at a more functional level. The interventions used to manage them, the way that you guys will manage the situation, and the integration approach taken, the strategy that is employed to carry this forward. So we touched on this slightly in when we talked about mergers and acquisitions, and this is this cultural due diligence. It's about managing the cultural issues of organised integration and not mandatory by law. And these, just to reiterate what I've mentioned before, are the levels to which that integration management of culture comes in. So steps in the alliance process. So instead of jumping straight into a relationship, a better approach would be to do an in-depth internal corporate analysis of your values, strategic objectives and goals. So I think Ben will talk about the not just the financial side, because like he said to me on the phone yesterday, he's not an accountant. He won't be giving the financial implications of all of this, but more of an overview of the legal aspects and the processes that they go through. Determine the alliance criteria of your partner. What it is that both of you require out of this alliance. Search for the partners that you require, and this is an important process prior to the actual alliance itself, is to search for the one that will promote a better environment, or economical environment for you to work. So one that will either work in conjunction with you or benefit you in another way. What's the word I'm looking for? To enhance what you do. Evaluate your findings, negotiate the terms, closure and agreements, and I think this is where Ben will come in and talk to you about these, the negotiating the terms and the closure and agreements about what it is that is going to be done. So these are subdivisions of the culture, organisation's culture, and this will very much depend on the structure of the organisation. But as you can see from here, what this is trying to illustrate is the differences in different types of micro and macro cultures that are to be considered. Oh, there you go. So at a macro level, a cultural audit and measurement can be applied to stakeholder management within the projects. Have you done anything about stakeholder management yet? No? Yes, no? Stakeholder management. I'll take it from that as a no. Okay. You will need to have a look at this, and I think I'll get Robert to try and address that with you in a couple of weeks. So it's about about managing not just the people within the organisation, but the people who have a stake in that organisation. So it's the customers and anybody on the outer, financiers, anybody who has a stake within that, in the banks as far as you're not concerned. So a list of stakeholders is compiled and a weighting can be applied based on the project manager's expertise, knowledge and other suitable criteria. I got a guy in from a construction company who's a project manager to speak to the undergraduates about stakeholder management and how he manages. Now, I presented them the week before all these wonderful tools that you can use to identify your stakeholders and how to prioritise them, to look at what their scope preferences are, etc., etc. But what it comes down to in the real world, as well as having these tools to help you, is this expertise and knowledge of this expertise and knowledge of the industry that you're in to identify these stakeholders. So this will include these sorts of people, and each list will be different depending on the organisation that it is, and this is about managing the different shareholders, unions, communities, suppliers. As I say, I mean, when this is a construction project, the stakeholders are vast because you're building in a populated area, so you have to consider the community, you have to consider the ecological impacts, and who will be benefited by that or not, and there's a whole stream of them, and I'm sure there are for the financial system as well, and this is something you'll have to identify. And then at a micro level, a project team, the investigators, I think that's supposed to say, it is instigators of the partnership. As a team, you need to examine your organisation's decision-making processes, the authority, their work behaviour. This is something that you're looking at, their incentive levels, the compensations, the type of communications, the leadership skills, the levels of secrecy, tolerated or desired, so it's a bit more difficult to ascertain with even not being within the organisation. You only have hard facts to go by, but possibly something that you can make assumptions on. We also talked about this, what sort of relationships do they have as an integrated? What is one a family-owned or business? Is it more corporate? Is it all about the revenue, or is it all about the relationships? So this will also impact on the way that you have to, all the sort of information that you need to collate in order to integrate these organisations successfully. So Charles Handy, written some really good books. Anyone know of Charles Handy? He can be a motivational speaker, but he's a business guru, if you like. Works alongside guys like Tom Peters in that sort of ilk. Has written some really interesting, insightful books, one of which is called The Elephant and the Flea, which is about organisations. It's probably about innovation more than the culture, although we just touched on this. But he does deal a lot with culture, and he looks at the structural view of organisational culture. And there are, as I say, we'll look at these three. One was Charles Handy, one's Deal and Kennedy, and the other one's Schultz. Relatively, I wouldn't say old, but yes, I will. Old in date-wise, but there's very little progression from this. Have gone from this, and this is where this is the groundations. This is the foundations of these theories. So Charles Handy looks at the structural view of an organisation and culture, and we talked about this as being one of the ways in which it will influence the culture, the ways in which the ways in which the company is organised and their structure. And he's identified 4 main environments in which culture manifests itself. So if you look at this power, you'll see there it looks like a spider's web, and this is the analogy he makes in this type of culture, where one person dominates, has a single power within the organisation. That's the spider in its web. And this is essentially a decision making where it's more centralised. This type of culture is seen essentially as political in the way that decisions are made, and they're based on the influence rather than the logical process because of the power that this one individual has. So that's probably pertains more to a family business or small entrepreneurship environment where there is room for just one leader in that environment. And then you look at the role culture, and he makes the analogy, as it says there, to the Greek temple. And the patron god here is Apollo, the god of reason. And he argues that being the role culture works by logic and rationality. That the pillars of the temple are strong in their own right, and activity is controlled more by rules and regulations than by personal direction from the top. So it was all of these different rules and regulations that filter through to determine the power of the organisation. So the pediment of the temple is seen as the coordinating activity rather than the overall or overlying control that is inherent in the power culture. And then you get this task culture. This is probably more associated with the project environment. As you can see there, it's more of a matrix, but he refers to it as a net. And the dominant concept in the task culture is project work associated, like I said before, the matrix structure. And he likens this to the Greek god Athena, who emphasises, emphasis was getting the job done. So it's about pulling together all the resources in order to get a task done, and that's why it's called a task. So it's putting all these resources, like a project environment, pulling together all the functions in order to achieve a certain goal. And then this person culture. This is probably an unusual one because it has minimal structures, and it exists only to service the needs of participating members of this particular environment. It doesn't have an overarching objective, such as found in the more conventionally structured ones as seen before this, but is more of pertaining to consultancy firms where there is no real power control, and it's minimal in its structure. It's not annoying, is it? Okay, so Deal and Kennedy looked at organisational culture and the external environment. And he looks at different cultural types and looks at the degree of risk in which that organisation will take, compared with the speed of the feedback that it takes as well. So he looks, if you've got a low degree of risk and a slow result in feedback, you get this process culture. This is typical of organisations where there's a low risk and slow feedback on actions and decisions. So this is more bureaucratic. So a bit like the university actually. It's this process culture. A lot of bureaucracy, a lot of, I would say, public organisations, such as councils or probably even the NHS, I would imagine. People with a high degree of risk and a slow feedback system is this bet your company culture, which are typical of organisations where risks are high and the feedback on actions and decisions take a long time. So manufacturers and anything that deals with capital goods. So if you can see the different types, I'll just reiterate what each one of these means. So we've got the work hard, play hard culture, and this is the world of sales. This type of culture that incorporates hard work and a lot of fun. It's quite ironic, really, because I was recounting someone had posted on Facebook, one of my friends from when I was doing sales in the pharmaceutical, of a picture of us at this corporate ball, and it just re-emphasises this, the way that it was hard work, but the rewards were a lot of fun. So that's that sort of culture. And then your tough guy, macho culture, which is takes high risks and receives rapid feedback on the outcomes of their actions. So it's instantaneous feedback on the way that they perform, and this is people who work in IT, software industries, entertainment, something where more prolific in this environment because of the way that we respond to the electronic world, if you like. Now everything's working a lot faster. So the last one is Schultz's 3 dimensions of culture. He looks at the external, the internal, and the evolution-induced dimensions of culture. His external induced dimension of culture draws directly from the work of Deal and Kennedy, which is what we looked at before, so you can ascertain what his philosophies were around that. But his internal induced dimension refers to 3 culture types, and that is the production, the bureaucratic, and the professional element, induced cultures. The evolution-induced dimension related to the strategic orientation of the organisation, as I said, and this is to do with the strategy, and that's can manifest itself in very many different ways. Either it's stable, it can be reactive, anticipative, explorative, and creative. So, and I won't read all of those out because I'm running out of time. I'm sure Ben will be here in a minute. So just to consolidate this, and I'll finish off the rest of this afterwards, organisations' capacity to change will depend on very many different variables, and culture being one of them. And how they deal with that is the way that you identify and the different informal and formal aspects of the organisation, to try and ascertain how people attitudes are, the attitudes of people, and their behaviours, and how they will respond to this this marriage, if you like. And you can ascertain for yourself here what the organisation's capacity to change is dependent on attitudes to criticism, attitudes to conflict, the degree to which the organisation's structure can change, and the attitudes to experimentation. So that's the innovative side of things. So I'll leave it there. I'll go and get Ben. Give you 5 minutes to collect yourselves. Have a Mexican wave.